Hello and welcome to the very first episode of this year. Welcome to the Breathing Body Podcast 2024. This podcast invites you to journey through conversations which share the fascination of the physical matter we inhabit, the breathing body. These conversations explore its inherent intelligent movement, healing, and much more. My name is Flurina and I'm your host. And yes, today's episode is slightly not what I thought it would be when I very carefully planned the whole schedule for all these episodes for the first couple of months. And I take a big jump and step and leap out of my comfort zone, and I'm recording a solo episode. And I share with you my story. And how did it come all about that? Well, just a couple of days ago, I went on a walk with a very dear old friend, and we were walking through slightly foggy, very freezy early evening in Switzerland. And I've told my friend about my vision, my podcast, and my ideas and plans for this coming year. And suddenly she said, well, tell me about your drive, your motivation behind all of that. Tell me about what's your story actually? What is your story? And so we kept walking. It was almost dark by that time. We arrived and it was pitch dark. And I shared my story with her. And the first thing which she said was, why have you never shared this story on your podcast? Share, that's the story you have to share, Flurina. Share this with your listeners, because this is why you are doing that whole thing. And seeing how, or witnessing how she was touched and inspired by all the challenges I went through, I had to sit with it for a little bit, and then I thought, okie dokes, okay, yes, I do it. The very first episode should be Flurina sharing her story for you to also maybe, understand or be able to witness why I'm doing that thing called the Breathing Body Podcast. So, I hope you enjoy this episode just as much or maybe less than the others, but I hope you get something out of it. And as always, if you do leave your comments, your thoughts, your questions, and share it with your family, your friends, that all is a huge support and keeps this podcast going. I wish you a wonderful, miraculous new year, and lean back and enjoy this episode. What is my story? She asked. And I said, my story is me and my body. And in that moment, I speak that out into my microphone. Oof, I could actually start to cry. My story is me and my body. It's Flurina and her body. And oh boy and oh girl, how many oceans of tears did I cry in my life as part of this story. And at the very same time, how much deepest joy and insights and the biggest moments of deeply felt awe did I experience as part of this story. And that's the story too, that I've lived through. I couldn't have lived through bigger polarities or dualities. I call it sheer forces of connecting and rejecting at the same time, of crying into laughter and laughing into cry. And I don't share my story that you feel sorry for me, or that I get lots of, oh, you poor thing, you. I've actually always hated that when people did that. I want to share my story on one level to inspire you to share your story too. It was just yesterday when I tuned into this episode, when I heard someone else saying how we all bring a unique gift to the world. We just do. And it's on us to maybe really find out what that gift is. And then it's our responsibility not to just hide and drag that gift along with us and put it somewhere into a neat and nicely polished box. It's our responsibility to share that gift. It's your responsibility to share your gift with the world. Because if you don't share it with the world, it's lost. You are so unique, and so am I. And that means our gifts and stories are so unique. So that if you and I don't share our story and our gift, yes, actually the world and humanity loses a very precious gift. So I want to share my story that hopefully you find inspiration, and hopefully, or maybe you might discover some skills which really helped me, which might help you too. The beautiful thing about skills, I always think, is that everyone can learn skills. We can just learn them. Yes, it might need practice, but we can learn them. And with sharing my story, I don't want to put eating disorders or difficulties onto the light page. Yes, eating disorders suck. My eating disorder sucked. And there is more to it. Yes, it sucks. It's fucking painful and difficult. And there is more to it. The hugest question which I ever got suggested from someone and found out myself was, what is the meaning I give my experience? And again, that's, my dear friend, that's our responsibility. And there we have a choice. You have a choice. What meaning do you give your experience? And yes, it took me ages until I really took that responsibility, and really it needs lots of energy, and it's sometimes easier to suffer. I agree. And the other big thing I want to say right from the start is that I think the biggest game changer now, when looking back in time, was when I realized that being in pain doesn't mean that I'm broken. Being in pain means that I'm healing. And I give the first credit to wonderful Dr. Anita Johnston. When I heard her saying, being in pain doesn't mean that you are broken, it means that you're healing. Wow, that was a big game changer. Maybe this episode isn't as linear as I wish to be, and I will just talk from my heart, and it's okay if this episode isn't linear, because healing isn't linear, because life isn't linear. Life is cyclical, so healing is cyclical, and therefore life is cyclical, therefore healing is cyclical, and this story is about my healing journey. So this episode is maybe quite cyclical as well, and not quite as linear. And that's the question, where does one's story begin? It obviously began that moment, or probably even before, when I was conceived in my mom's womb, right? And that body, that creature really started to unfold and say yes. And I start my story today with you with just briefly telling you about my childhood. If I think back to my childhood, I could cry again, but out of joy. I'm so grateful and I feel deeply blessed into the family I was born. I was born into the most loving family you could ever imagine. And when I think about my childhood, I was the youngest of 3, so luckily I had quite a couple of years where my older sister and brother would be in kindergarten, at school, and I was at home just with mom. And oh yes, my mom was there for me. And I think that was 2 of the lushest years of my life. I would just spend days with her. She would just take me, whatever she did. We would go shopping into the garden, onto the market. We would craft, we would bake. And that was the 2 years where my fantasy and the world of my imaginations had no boundaries. I would just create and draw and build and move and sing. And if I think back to these years of my childhood, I see literally rainbows and I see raspberry pink clouds which gently embrace me. And yes, that felt like paradise. And then I was sent to school. And for me, it felt like I was sent to school. It wasn't a choice. I had to go to school. And I arrived at school, and I feel very touched when I share that. I arrived at school. It was the first day. It was a wonderful, but it was a big, quite impressive, stony building. It was stone. The building was stony. I grew up in a soft wooden house, and there was stone. All the floors were stone. And I opened that big door. I had to really take all my force and push that door open. I was very slim and small. Well, not very slim, but slim and not very small, but I was slim and small. I was slim, but not small. I was slim and tall. And I had to really push this door open. And I entered that building, the new world of school, and it felt like a splash. It felt like a reality clash and splash. And looking back in time, yes, I think there was a voice, a part of me who knew that now there is a different wind blowing. My loving years with mom are over. And I think it was that very moment when I looked around and kids were running around and there was so much happening and there were books and desks and alarms and there were no colors and no toys and that I felt I wasn't quite sure if I went into a deep sleep or if I've just woken up. But it was different. And I noticed that I was different. I grew up in a family. We had no car, we had no television, we didn't even have a coffee machine. We were the kind of eco-freaks I noticed when I was sent to school. I had a woolen jumper and very long socks and leather sandals, and even my school rucksack had a fur on. And I chose that fur from a farm close to our place, and I loved that fur. But the moment I went to school, I saw how that fur differed myself from the other children. So I was different. And in that moment, the very best I could, the way I could interpret that was by making the decision, I'm not good enough. Because yes, you can imagine, I did get rejected and I did get mobbed from other kids in that age. I didn't understand why those children did that, of course, at that time, and that this had nothing to do with me. What I saw was that I was different. I'm different. I'm being rejected, hints I'm not good enough. And from that day onward, all I can remember are not the rainbows and the raspberry pink, lovingly, softeningly embracing clouds. Part of me thought, fuck all of those clouds. Real life is actually, I think there is almost a sense of anger and frustration. And little Flurina didn't understand, did my parents lie to me? Why did they give me so much love and told me always I'm good enough when in actual fact I go to school and all I experience is rejection? And what I was just about to say was, from that day onwards, if I think back to, wow, maybe 7 until, I don't know, 25, I'm now 30, I can tell you. The biggest thing I remember is that whatever task I was given, whatever thing I want to do myself, the first thought and the biggest fear was always, I'm not good enough. What if I can't do it? What if I'm not good enough? So yes, I still kind of flew through these cool years I had. Academically, it was okay. That wasn't the issue. But there was rejection and lots of comparison. That's also where I started to compare myself. And that became a key part later on. And all of you listeners who might have struggled with a similar story are also dealing with eating difficulties, comparison. Isn't that our big tough lesson to learn to let go of? So I started to compare myself and everything, right? From the way I look, the way I walk, the way I would write, the way I would read, the way I would interact, and what I would eat, my school jumper, my school bag, just everything and anything, my parents, our cycles, our garden, our house, our vacation, everything. Comparison, comparison, comparison. In that young time, I can't really remember my relationship to foods, but I remember one key moment, and I think it's interesting that whenever I went to therapy, that moment came back. And that was maybe, I was 2 years into school, and my uncle was on visits and my cousins, and we went to this apple farm to pick up apples. It was around Christmas as well. And the farmer would put these big apples onto the big scale. It was such a big scale that even me or my cousins could be sat in it. And we were kids, so we wanted to go into that scale. And one after the other, we climbed up and sat into this scale. And my weight was more than my cousin's. And my uncle said, he meant it jokingly, but he said, "Oh, you better be careful what you eat." He said it just like that, and he didn't mean it, but he said, "Oh, you better be careful what you eat." And this one sentence, it went into my ears, and it started to spin around my head and all my brain, my neurons, my synapses. It started to spin around. It started dancing all around in my body, in my belly, in my feet. I started to put my hands on my own body, and it was the first time that I considered my body, she couldn't be good enough. I knew that I kind of wasn't good enough, but until so far, I didn't make the link that might be because because my body isn't good enough. The very way it looks, just with its bone and skin and muscles and fat. So in that moment, looking back, it was the greatest gift, right? But in that moment, yes, something happens there. I went on in my school years. I went to the 5th primary school, and all I wanted was to be loved. I wanted to be loved, to be seen, to be accepted. Being loved and being seen, for me, that always felt or meant freedom, to be free. And already little Flurina, I always connected that with a feeling of feeling light and feeling spacious. Lots of space inside me and a light feeling. That's how love and freedom and being seen would have felt for me. And being there in the 5th primary school, 11 years, my glass started to fill with pain. And I just couldn't change my mind. I couldn't change that belief that I am good enough. So the best thing I could come up with was, and it happened on a Wednesday morning. It was early spring, it was quite sunny, it was warm. It was a Wednesday morning, it could have been a really ordinary Wednesday morning, and on some level it was an ordinary Wednesday morning. I went to school, the alarm bells rang, we went out for our break. I had my same school shoes on, I had the same znuni in my lunchbox. Kids were running around. And I was walking over the schoolyard. I was wearing a rusty red shirt and a big chain of pearls, pink and neon green, big chunky pearls around my neck. I was walking over the schoolyard, and there suddenly was a really clear voice and thought which said, if I was thinner, life would be easier. I couldn't change my mind at that moment, and that's the solution I came up with. If I was thinner, life would be easier. If I was thinner, I would feel lighter, more spacious. If I was thinner, therefore, I would be loved and I would be free. And that, looking back in time, is what I think was the explosive start into my journey living with eating difficulties. I was 11 years old then, and now I'm 30, and yes, the past 2 years have been amazing, and I'm so free, and we'll get to that later. But what I just wanted to say, so from 11 to, I would say maybe 25, so that's more than 10 years. My life has been all about food. Thinner, the thinnest. What could I possibly do to be thinner? How can I lose weight? How more could I control my body? That was what my life was all about. That was the day when I started to chase one diet after the other, one new idea after the other. I spent nights thinking about strategies and ideas, what to eat and what not to eat and when to eat and what to leave out when. To start a diet, to commit to it, to be on it, to lose weight, to suddenly realize, oh no, shit, what am I doing? To stop it, and then fall into the big guilt and frustration trap and thinking, you see, again, you didn't do it. That's the proof you are not good enough. So again, new diet. And this time I really stick to it. And that felt fucking bloody, 17 years. Of committing to a diet and then breaking the diet and then punish myself, and as punishment, just throw myself into a new and next diet. Yes, it was all about foods and diet, and it was all about lies. It was all about lies. I spent 17 years lying to so many people. I lied to my parents, to my sister, to my friends, to my teachers, to my therapist. I had to come up with new lies every day. It had to be a lie. What could I say what I've already eaten? Why wasn't I hungry? Why and where had I already eaten? Why did I not like that food? Why did that food give me an allergy or that food give me a rash? Wouldn't you believe I would even sometimes actually pretend or actually cook something and throw all the food away? But in that way, it looked like I've really eaten. Yes, I came up with all these crazy behaviors. And the more I went down, I call it, yes, I did go down a deep down spiral and felt like a rabbit hole. And the more I went down that spiral, the more I found purpose, the more I could identify myself with it. It felt like I became the eating disorder and it became all my life. And that's why it was a mission impossible to stop anything at any point at that point, because it was so much part of me. It gave me purpose. It gave me a reason to get up in the morning. And yes, if one doesn't eat, one feels light. So I did feel light and I felt spacious. And I loved that feeling of lightness. And I got addicted of continuing not to eat, to continue eating lights. And if I felt something, if I ate just something a little bit too big, it felt like it was right stuck underneath my skin. And I had to stop eating to keep following that addiction of lightness. And yes, I felt light, but deep inside, in the core of me, was pure heaviness and pain. The lighter I got and felt, the moments where I was the lightest also on the scale, that was where the deep core inside me was pitch dark, a solid rock of dense pain. There was so much pain. And I finished school, and would you imagine, I chose to study dance. I was on one level, and that's a theme I mentioned in the beginning. That's where that journey started. My story was always me and my body, and as a little child I always wanted to move. I wanted to be an actress, a singer, a dancer, circus acrobat. So yes, from maybe around actually 11 years onwards, I always wanted to be a dancer. On one level, I pushed my body away as much as I possibly could, and at the same time I wanted to study the body in all its depth, and I wanted to explore and train and get to my body. So I did both at the same time. I rejected any food, but I spent the whole day moving and exploring my body. So during all my dance studies, yes, on one level, yes, I was very alive and I was connected with my body, but in a very hard way, in a very hard and painful way. My mind had my body under control. Throughout that all these years of dancing, I actually didn't just allow my body to express itself, which now I know that would be the ultimate thing. That's why I want to dance. But at that moment, dance was probably an other window where I could really use my mind to control my body. It was all about control. And I'm not going to go too much into these dance years now, but yes, I danced and danced and danced, and I came to a point where I was so thin, and I've ran myself in such a corner with not eating. There was just so much pain and no energy that I had to stop my dance studies. And stopping my dance studies in that moment was absolutely painful. Because, of course, what Flurina told, what I told myself was, you see, you're not good enough, you've given up. For many years, I felt like the biggest failure, and I gave up that one dream, which I've always wanted to realize. But also giving up the dance. If I wouldn't have given up the dance training at that time, I wouldn't now be here, host of this podcast and supporting other people to find healing. So it was perfect, but it felt very imperfect at that moment. Maybe something little which I'd like to share at this moment was, of course, I went through many therapies, and for a long time I went through I call them the usual therapies, and there is nothing wrong with these therapies per se, but for me they didn't work. I went through a lot of therapies and it was all about food. It was all about food. I felt that no one actually asked me to dig underneath the food. It was just all about food. And nothing changed because I just kept lying. I knew it wasn't about the food, but all these therapies were just all about food. I had to have a food diary and write down and measure and weigh myself, and it was about getting even more control about that food and what I eat and my food schedule. And now I know that is not the solution. Today I know, no, and it's not about food. And I've going through that way myself. I've learned skills and things which for me really were the solution. And so I'm grateful that I went through these therapies which didn't work. But often, and I think that was a key moment in my eating disorder recovery, I would leave these therapies feeling more desperate than I felt when I went into the session. And that's the moment where I promised myself, if I ever work with anyone, I want them to leave the space less desperate than they felt when they came. And that's where I fell the deepest, because I felt that no one can help me. I'm lost. Not even a therapist can help me. And that was the absolute worst moment in my whole eating disorder recovery journey. I felt given up. I felt given up. Not even a trained therapist can help me. And I felt very close of giving myself up. I felt very close of giving myself up. And yes, that was the moment where I thought, no one can help me. My life will always be about food, and it will always be about deep pain. And that was so painful. That was so painful. I can feel that pain now when I share it with you. And today, of course, I know no one can help me. No one could have ever helped me, because only I myself can help me. Only she, my body, can help me. And in that moment, I would have needed someone who would have helped me to connect with me so that I myself can help me. And later on, I found, especially in my time in the UK, I found amazing people and therapists who did help me. But in that moment, that was that worst moment of feeling given up. Everyone had given me up because no one could help me. And somehow I didn't give up. I'm not sure how, my dear listeners. I don't know how, but I didn't give up. I felt so destroyed and at the bottom of the ocean, and I felt in so much pain. But I didn't give up. And the one thing, and there's the other big wonderful paradox, I felt I will always feel pain in my body, but I just kept following this one calling, which was that I wanted to study the human body in all its depth. And I find that so fascinating. I couldn't struggle more with my body at that moment. And at the same time, it was the eager and fascination of the human body which kept me going. So I didn't give up, and I just followed that calling. And I went traveling in India. I did lots of yoga. That was a wonderful time. I still struggled with eating, but that was the first moment where I started to kind of listen to myself and to allow myself to just do lush, nice things. That was the first time in my life, and I gave myself a rest. I would just sit at the river Ganges and just rest. just read, just write. I still ate very little, but I ate little in a kind way. So that was one key moment, one turnaround moment. And in India, even more, I decided, yes, I keep going. I don't give up. And I decided to study osteopathy. I hadn't had lots of osteopathy until then, but I was fascinated to use my hands to facilitate healing in others. I loved to touch, to use touch, to work on other bodies or to move. So I decided to study osteopathy. And I moved to the UK. That was 7 years back, and I'm still in the UK, by the way. I had no clue what my plan would have been afterwards, and now I'm falling into love more and more with living here. So I went on to study osteopathy, and yes, at the moment I work as an osteopath, but I also do many other things. And the one game changer on my osteopathic journey was when we learned about embryology. We didn't learn a lot about embryology, and to be honest, it was quite dry what we learned. But immediately, I was absolutely absorbed and drawn into that subject of embryology. Embryology is the subject of how we grow in mom's womb, our life before we are born. The story about how we came to be. And I started to read, and I couldn't have immersed myself more into that topic of embryology and read and just engage with the embryo. And I noticed how the first movement or the first gesture we ever express in life is a gesture of yes. It's an opening, it's an unfolding. When I realized how sperm meets egg, and then the embryo, that little being, it doesn't doubt itself, it doesn't question itself, it just grows and expands and expands. It just says yes, second by second by second. And it says yes with its whole body, because it just keeps growing upwards and right to left and down, and it unfolds, and it just spreads and expands into the world without questioning or doubting itself. And all that being needs is being cared for, meaning it needs safety, the warm, safe space of the womb, and it needs to be nurtured, which of course is through the umbilical cord. And I saw this embryo, actually the first expression of me, because I was an embryo in my mom's womb and you were an embryo in your mom's womb, is one of pure creation and expression. And that was the moment where I realized I need my body. I need her. I need my body to create a life. And yes, I've always wanted to live a life beyond my wildest dreams. Within the biggest moments of the eating disorder, I had huge visions and dreams. I wanted to create my life beyond my wildest dreams. And in that moment, when I saw the gesture of the embryo, I noticed that I need my body. I need her. It will be through her that I will create the life I'm here meant to create and share. And I suddenly felt that if I connected with the embryo, which is still in me, that she also just wants to expand, to spread, she wants to open her wings, and she wants to bring herself into the world. And that was the moment where I noticed, actually, just my body is good enough. and it has never not been good enough. And that's where I got overwhelmed with waves of how fascinating and miraculous that body is. And that's why I'm here having a podcast about the fascination and the miracles of the human body, because that was the moment where that vision was born. I wanted to share this message with all of you. And that's why I'm sharing my story today. And of course, there I noticed, wow, how could I ever not nurture my body? How could I have spent 17 years not giving food to my body, to her, when she is the one creating my life with me, when she is the one expressing my dreams? How could I not nurture her? How can I be so tough? And I had maybe 2 years, I tell you, where I felt almost into a depression. There was so much pain. I felt all the sadness and anger and frustration I didn't allow myself to feel, and I just covered with not eating. And there was such a pain of how on earth could I spend 17 years being so mean and tough and hard with myself? It felt like waking up from a very bad dream. And I saw like a movie how I missed on so many things when I was a youngster. I saw all the moments I didn't join, I didn't go to the event, I didn't eat the ice cream, I watched the others doing things which I want to do. I saw all these moments where I just curled up in my room crying, and suddenly I saw what I took away from her, what I took away from that young girl and that young woman who just wanted to live a life beyond her wildest dreams. And yes, I probably felt a little bit into depression, and I had to. It was perfect to fall into a depression, because what happened in that moment is that suddenly I started to live through all those feelings. Suddenly it wasn't about the food, it was about the feelings and emotions. And now I'm just pondering of how much more to share, or maybe that's where I share for the moment where I stop sharing my story, and part 2 is where we go on in 2 weeks' time with Anita, because what I've learned with Dr. Anita Johnson was what brought me greatest healing. And what I've learned was that it is the behavior, the moments I have eating disorder behaviors. These are signals which gently nudge me back onto the path to my true authentic self. And it's exactly the foods I struggled with the most are the foods which hold the greatest key for deepest understanding for myself. So that's where I suddenly started, well, not suddenly, it was a long process, but I started to express my feelings and emotions, and I allowed that to be the sweetest song and the strongest dance. And I started a dialogue with her, with my body. I call her. And I came up with these 4 questions, and these 4 questions are 3 questions to ask her every day. And especially in the moment when you feel, I am overwhelmed with a wave of eating disorder behavior, I would ask herself, how are you? How would you like to be met? What do you need, and how can I serve you? And I started to learn to identify my emotions with that, to accept them, and then to express them. And that's where it's actually so lush and joyous. I could have written books and choreographies and poetry once I start to express my emotions. And yeah, one of the key questions I've learned to ask was, in that moment where I noticed the behavior of the eating appear, to ask myself, What feeling am I trying not to feel right now? And I learned from Dr. Anita Johnson that all of us women with eating disorders often are highly sensitive, highly intuitive, and have a huge gift to bring to the world. And it isn't unless we dare to move through the faith of I have an eating disorder that we really find our true destiny. And yes, we will dive much more into that healing part of my story in 2 weeks' time when I talk with Dr. Anita Johnson. I can't wait to share this episode with you. And today I'm here. I'm very proud mom of this podcast. I'm thriving. I live a life beyond my wildest dreams, and I'm fully healed from my eating disorder, and I'm so proud. I'm happy to share that with you, because I know you can be in a place where you feel that's just impossible. And I know that Dr. Anita Johnson knows, and it is possible. You can fully heal from eating difficulties. And I went that way and through that path, and I'm now here sharing it with you, and I'm doing the work I do to maybe support you, I hope to support many, many women out there. I cried oceans full of tears for 17 years, and I don't think that we all need to do that. And it's my greatest vision and mission to bring my story, and with that the work which is born and being born through my story into the world, to contribute. Because I know that the earth, the world right now needs all of us women, and especially needs all these pearls hidden underneath an eating difficulty. You can see I'm very passionate about what I'm talking about it, and I'm so grateful that my greatest challenge became my greatest gift. And yeah, thank you for listening. Thank you for spreading and sharing this episode. And if you know someone who is suffering from eating, please share this episode, share the coming episode, and I'm looking forward to hear from you. Wow, it turned out to be a little bit longer episode than I thought it would be, and that's perfect. That's okay. That's wonderful. I hope you found inspiration or encouragement in listening to me, and I'm very much looking forward to hear your comments, your thoughts, your questions. Tell me, what would you like me to talk more about regarding my journey, my story? Where are you? In what moment are you stuck at the moment? And how, with sharing more, could I maybe help you more? Please get in touch, write to me. I'm looking forward to hear from you. You can find me on Instagram, Flurina _ the breathing body. There is also a webpage called, a brand new webpage, flurinatali.com. That's also how you can get in touch with me. You can enjoy my work via this podcast, The Breathing Body. I'm also coaching women within a program called Dancing into Light, which at the moment is a 10-week journey where we exactly explore that one skill which helped me the most, which is the dialogue with you, with your body, with her, and how we can start to identify, accept, and express our feelings and emotion, and listen to these very important messages underneath, guiding us back onto the path to live a life beyond our wildest dreams. In London, I'm very soon launching a new yoga class, weekly yoga from a woman, for women, as well as a monthly women's circle. You can find all these information also in the show notes. And yes, it's a great pleasure to to offer this podcast to you. I wish you well, and I wish you a miraculous 2024. Trust your heart, feet, belly, guts, and lots of love, Flurina.